Guys, and we are ready to do March's project, and this is the one that we're doing just the techniques. It's the embroidery hoop stitch sampler is what it's called. So we're going to be doing the piecing and applique and chenille and fringe and red work and decorative stitches. And this is a little bit different video. I'm at home today and Bailey's here helping me film. So I've gone ahead and I've gathered up all of the supplies, and so as far as stabilizer over there, you're going to need, it called for medium weight cutaway. I didn't have any here at home, so I'm using heavyweight, and you need 2 hoopings worth. Now, okay, back up. I'm going to be doing the design that's fit for the 5x7 hoop. There is one for the 8x10, and so if you have the 8x10 or larger, you can do it all in one hooping, but I'm doing the 5x7 so that we can show the multi-hooping technique. And so I need 2 pieces of the cutaway, then we need 1 piece of the water-soluble topping, and so I've got that cut, and then all the thread, Kimberbell tape. I will be needing a spray bottle for water here in a minute. I've got a bobbin wound with the water-soluble thread for the fringe, and then I've gone ahead and I've wound me a couple of bobbins with a couple of the colors of thread, the red and the dark gray, and I'll explain that when we get to it. And then for the piecing, I use the fabric folding pin or the starch pin. For the chenille, you need a rough brush, and I use a toothbrush. And then to cut the chenille, I have a seam ripper. I usually use the little chenille cutters, but it's at the store. I don't have it here. Then we have an 8-inch embroidery hoop that will frame it in. And then you need 2 thumbtacks. And then this is, I didn't do up a kit because all you need is really scraps. And so you need a 9x9 background piece. And I've gone ahead and ironed the fusible backing, or the SF101, on the back side of it. And then I'm going to go over kind of your pieces of fabric. So since we didn't cut a kit. So I'm going to kind of maybe show this so you can kind of see what we're talking about. For the butterfly, you need 2 pieces of fabric, and on your handout it tells you how big to cut them. So you need the top piece and the bottom piece. For the chenille heart, you need 4 pieces of cotton fabric. So I've cut those. The red work, the decorative stitches, and the fringe is just all thread. And then for the piecing, it wanted 2 of these pieces, okay, that are the same, and then it has 2 pieces for this darker part, and then 2 pieces for the lighter part. And on the instructions here, it does show you, here's the little picture of the, what's that called, flying geese. So it's showing it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so it shows you here for fabric pieces 1 and 4, so it'll be that and that. So you can cut all those pieces, and I think they're the same size pieces for the 8x8 and the 5x7 hoop. For the 5x7 hoop, you are going to have 2 stitch files. So on your USB stick, you'll have the 3 stitch files. And again, since I'm doing for the 8x8 or 8x12 machines, this can all be done in 1 hooping. But since I'm going to be doing the 5x7, I have 2. This one is going to be our first design, so we'll bring that one up. And what it's going to stitch first is a crosshair. And I was going to show you this. It took me, I couldn't really see the crosshair. It's not the separate crosshair that we usually stitch off in the center of our hoop. This crosshair is built into the design, and I couldn't really see it, so I was going to show you. We can change the color of that crosshair because it's in white right here. So I can go into the edit screen, and then you have this little icon that's your thread colors. And the crosshair happened to be the very first design, so that's the part that's selected, or the first color of the design. So I'm just going to pick a darker color, and see, now we can see it on our screen. And so we're going to stitch that off directly onto our stabilizer, and that's just going to help us get our fabric piece placed so that everything lines up, because this is a multi-hooping. Now I've gone ahead and threaded up with kind of this light blue color because I just wanted you to see the stitching a little bit better. I would probably maybe use white for this. Okay, so what it's gonna do now, well, what we're gonna do now, I'm gonna go ahead and spray my hoop with the 505 spray. Okay, now this is where I like to go ahead and spray the stabilizer that's in the hoop with the 505 spray. This is a little big, but this works great for your bigger hoops. But what you can do is get, you know, the top of like a milk jug. This is a pretzel container, like either a gallon or a half-gallon milk jug, and then you cut the bottom off and you set that down in your hoop, and then you spray down in that, and that helps keep from getting the 505 spray all over your hoop. So I just kind of laid, I don't have my gallon here at home. I don't have anything at home. I guess everything's at the store. So we've got the crosshairs. Now, what it says in the instructions to do is take the fabric and fold it in half and then in half again and crease it. I didn't want to crease it because I didn't want to crease presses or crease folds into the fabric. So I just turned it over, and it's a 9x9 square, so I just marked the center of it. And so we're just going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to line up that stand up, line up the crosshairs with the crosshair on the hoop, and the bulk of the fabric, I just kind of follow that down, lift that up, make sure it's on there. It says the bulk of the fabric will be to your left over there. Okay, so that's good. And so now we're just going to put that back on the machine, and what it's going to stitch next is just a little tack down to hold this in place. So the first technique that we're doing is the piecing in the hoop, okay? So what it usually does first is it stitches out a little template, kind of showing you where all of your pieces are gonna lay. And sometimes, it depends on the project, sometimes that's done on just the stabilizer. Sometimes you lay your a piece of batting down and then a piece of fabric on top of it, but it just depends on the project that we're doing. So once it does, excuse me, once it does the little template, what you're going to do, it's saying to lay fabric piece 1 down. So this is going to be the fabric that my little triangle flying geese are in. So you always lay your first piece right side up, covering that first little triangle right there. Okay, and the first thing it's going to stitch is a trim line. Now, after it stitches that trim line, we're just going to go in, try to keep my hand out of the way, and trim the fabric here on this side away. And then you take your next piece, and so this first piece was right side up, the next piece is right side down, and we're just going to center it on that trim line. And I like to cover up the fabric, and then what it will stitch next will be the seam. Okay. And then this is where we use that fabric folding pin or the starch pin, and you just run that, kind of squeeze it a little bit, run it along that seam, and then you flip this over, and that just helps lay that fabric down. And then the next thing it's going to stitch is going to be the trim line on the other side. Okay, and we're going to take, and I don't know if I can do that, trim. Is my hand in the way? Lay it like this so my hand maybe won't be in the way. There. And there is always kind of a little bump where that seam was sewn that you just kind of have to go up and over. And then you lay your next piece right side down on top of that. I'm going to cover up the fabric, just kind of center it, and then I'm going to go up and cover up that edge, and then it will sew the seam line again. And we'll take folding pin and then flip that back over, and we have our first little flying geese. And then next thing will be the trim line, and that's going to go straight. Trim this away. And then this is going to be my next geese, flying geese on my pink fabric. Lay that on top, cover that up. It's right side down. Then stitch the seam. Press it with the pin, flip it over, and then we'll stitch the trim line for the next side. And see how your trim line's so small? So I just kind of extend it down and just try to cut straight, you know, across there. So just kind of go straight across. Get all the fuzzies off. Now this is going to be our lighter color fabric. So I don't know why they had two different type colors of fabric for this. I guess just to give it some more fabric texture. Cover up center the fabric, cover up that fabric, and lay this piece right side down. So this is just like piecing with your regular machine, because you have your pieces right sides together and it's sewing your seam. There's just a couple extra steps because you have to trim the excess away. Then we're gonna starch that, flip it over, and then stitch the next trim line. And I dropped my other piece of fabric here, so I'm gonna be down. Okay, now we need to trim this away up here. Start and then just come up, get all that out of the way, lay the next piece right side down. And you want to make sure here that you are, because this fabric is a lighter color fabric than what's down here. If you lay that fabric just even with the trim line there, when you flip this over, you'll see that darker fabric. So when it's a lighter color fabric especially, I like to cover up all of the fabric that's underneath there. And that way when I flip it over, I won't see the underneath fabric in the seam. Okay, then we're going to take that starch pen, squeeze it. And the starch pens, if you haven't used these, they come with a little bottle of solution, and you just unscrew the top, drip about 4 or 5 drops of the little starch solution down in here, and then fill the rest up with water, and that's your solution. Okay, now what it's saying to do now, we're on page 8 and we're on step 37. I don't think I've done I know I haven't done a project, so I don't know if they've had other projects where they're doing this, but this is where we're using that water-soluble topping. And because what it does next, when you're done with the piecing, it will come around and do kind of a final tack down. And the reason they're having us put this water-soluble stabilizer down, it makes sense, because it's going to come up, and we've all had this happen before. The foot catches on some of this fabric as it goes around, and it'll make just a mess. So they're telling us to take a piece of the water-soluble topping, and I cut mine rather large. Can you hand me the tape? So this topping will keep our foot from catching. So it was a good idea. Okay, so what it's going to stitch next is just a little tack down all the way around the outside of our pieced square. Okay, now what we're supposed to do is trim everything here on the outside. So I'm going to go in and I'm trimming the water-soluble stabilizer, and I'm trimming the fabric. Try not to cut the stitches. Now, this piecing project, we're going to, because it's creating this on the sample, we're going to come and do a little satin stitch around the outside of it. She's talking over here. She's throwing her 2 cents worth in. So I'm going to trim all the way around, and it's going to do the satin stitch. Usually, like when you're doing a pieced project, it doesn't do a satin stitch around it, but this is just for this little sampler that we're doing. And she does have all kinds of little pieced projects. I think she calls them stitch by number, and that are in the vault on her website. That we used to, we did them when they first came out with them. We did them in a bunch of classes years ago, but they're now available in the vault. Okay, so we've got all that trimmed away. I'm leaving that water-soluble stabilizer there in the center because I don't want my foot to catch on it. Now I've got to decide what thread I'm going to do, and I'm going to rethread the machine, and Bailey's going to stick her pacifier in her mouth. Okay, so I threaded up with the pink, and now we're going to start stitching the satin stitch. And while that's stitching, hope you can hear me, I was going to show you on her website, whoops, Doug's at the store, where to go to find these designs on the vault. First, go to our website and then click on the Kimberbell link, and then go to products, and then just scroll down, and she has like the Get It Today section, and there's the vault. And so when you go in there, you can just scroll down. Now remember, in the vault, she has embroidery stuff and she has sewing machine stuff. So make sure you're not going into the sewing machine stuff if you want something for machine embroidery. And you can just click on Shop All, and you can scroll down. We're actually going to be doing these little mini wall hangings in a class coming up later. But as I scroll down, I was going to get to some of the piecing stuff. Yeah, so here's one, the little cocoa cup. And then, hang on, I'll go find them. Here's another one, the little spool of thread. So it's just kind of got them all scattered around there. But those are all piecing in the hoop projects that are kind of fun. They make little, oh, there's one. They make little little banners that you can hang up. They're only about maybe 6 by 6, 7 by 7, but they're pretty fun to do. So finished doing the satin stitch, and so that's perforated that water-soluble topping, so I can just go in here and tear it away. And I shouldn't have to perforated it good enough that I won't have to get it wet or anything to get it all out of there. So now that project is done, or that technique is done. So the next thing that it's going to do is the red work type of design. Now, they're not recommending this in the instructions, but I recommend this. Red work, and when we do the little labels here in a minute, those are tiny, tiny little like straight stitches, and sometimes your bobbin will show on those little bitty stitches. So I like to have a matching bobbin. So I've gone ahead and I've threaded up with red on top, and so I'm just going to change out my bobbin thread to match my top thread whenever I do those little bitty stitches. And that's really the only tip for red work type designs that I have. So now it's just going to stitch. It's a little sewing machine, and so it's going to stitch that off for our red work technique. So finished stitching our little red work sewing machine, and what it's going to stitch next are just the little labels. So it's going to label this one red work and this one piecing, and I'm going to use a darker color thread. And normally, like, I think it's suggesting black for this, but when I'm using more pastel colors, I like to use more just like the dark gray color. So that's what I have the machine threaded up with. And then these are going to be small little letters. So I'm going to go ahead and change to a darker bobbin also for this. So I'm just going to put that darker. You could use like a black pre-wound. And then it's just going to stitch our little labels, and then we will come back. Okay, so it's done our little labels, and these are going to have some little jump threads, tiny little jump threads I'm going to have to go in and clip, but I'll do that when we're done. So the last thing it's going to stitch off are the registration marks, because I'm doing the multi-hooping technique. And so I've put pre-wound back in my bobbin, and then I've threaded back up with just this lighter blue color. I'm doing that so maybe you can see the little registration marks a little bit better on the camera. I would probably do that in white or a color to match your background color. But it's just going to stitch little L shapes here for our registration marks. Okay, so this half of the design is done. So I'm just going to unhoop it, and then we will hoop up our other piece of cutaway. Okay, now when I took it out of the hoop, I went ahead and I trimmed away most of my stabilizer. So I just kind of left it there where the registration marks are, and then around the design. And then we've hooped up the second piece of cutaway. And then on your USB stick, since we're doing the two parts, we're going to come back and get this second half here. And what it's going to stitch off first are going to be the registration marks that we've got to line up these with. So this is just stitched directly on our stabilizer. Are you up high enough to see? Okay, so what we need to do, we have the registration marks stitched on our stabilizer, and I have my 2 thumbtacks. So you're going to turn the hoop over to the back side, and you want to stick the corner or the point of the thumbtack into that corner of the little L shape there. So when it pokes out, see, it's coming out right in that corner. See that? And then once you have that in there, just tape it down and then do the same thing over on the other corner. Make sure it's poking out in the corner there. And then tape that one down. Then we're going to take our fabric, and I need to make sure the design is going. Yeah, okay, I've got it pulled up the right way. So this is going to be the top of our fabric over here on your left, okay? So I'm going to take and push the corner of this registration mark, and it's kind of hard to tell here because you have the kind of the bobbin thread and the top thread, but I'm going to line it up there. Can you see that? With that thumbtack right on the corner there, right like that. And then do the same thing with this one. Right like that. And then just, you could, I should have sprayed this with 505 spray, and that helps it stick down better. But now I'm just gonna, well, no, before you do this, before you put this on the machine, do not forget to take the thumbtacks out. So turn it back over, and you could tape this down. I'm going to do that. Since I didn't spray it with 505 spray, I'm going to tape this to my hoop, and that will help hold it in place. 505 spray works a little bit better. In fact, I'm going to do this. And I think I'm out of 505. There we go. Now we're going to put that back on the machine. No, we're not. Bailey's looking at me. Mom, you need to take the thumbtacks out. There we go. Do not forget to take the thumbtacks out. Now we're going to put this back on the machine. Okay, so we just did everything on page 10 here on step 7. And it has highlighted, remove the thumbtacks from the back of the hoop. And then what's going to stitch next is just the little basting tack down for the top of our hoop. And then the next project that we're going to be doing is the applique butterfly. And in the prep work, it did tell you to fuse some of the SF101 or fusible backing on the back of these 2 pieces for our appliques. Now, what it's going to stitch first is a placement line for our pink fabric. Usually when you're doing applique in the hoop, your each applique has 3 steps. It has a placement line, a tack down, and then a cover stitch. So this is our placement line. Then we're going to lay that fabric. Make sure you're covering that placement line completely. And you could tape this down if you wanted to. I'm just going to hold it. And then this is our tack down. And so this is going to tack our piece of fabric down. And usually it does go around the tack down twice so that it holds it nice and secure, because what we need to do next is trim it. So now some projects will do all of your placement lines and tack downs before they come back and start doing the little cover stitches. This one, it's doing it all together. So it did the tack down or the placement line, tack down. We're gonna trim this fabric next. And when I'm trimming, I like to always have the applique piece above me. And then I just take the scissors, the top scissor blade, and butt that up against the stitches, and then just take little snips as you go around. But as I get down here to the bottom, I just turn the hoop so that my applique piece is always on top above my scissors. Now this, and I'm sitting kind of crooked and Bailey's over to the side, so it may look at kind of a little different angle to you. I'm losing that piece up underneath the machine. And just kind of pull the fabric taut as I'm trimming it, and that helps you get pretty close. And if you happen to cut a stitch here and there, it's okay, because it is going to come back with that cover stitch. And when it does do like all the placement lines and all the tack downs at one time, I'll just usually use a neutral color thread for all of that, and then come back and match my thread exactly when it does the cover stitch. So that's what it's going to do next, is a cover stitch. This one on this project for both sections of the butterfly happens to be a satin stitch like this. Some projects she'll do a little decorative stitch as the cover stitch. So I finished doing the satin stitch down there on the bottom, and I've threaded up with kind of a blue color that I'm going to be doing the next placement line. So this is for the top part of the butterfly. Lay that piece down, make sure you're covering up all of it, and this is where it'll do the tack down, and it'll stitch around it twice. And now we need to trim that fabric away. So I've got it trimmed away, and now it will just start doing the cover stitch. Now I did want to make a note here, kind of a correction. I was saying sometimes it does the satin stitch as the cover stitch, and sometimes it does a decorative stitch. You kind of want to look at your design and kind of plan ahead, because if it does do a decorative stitch as the cover stitch, you usually want to match your thread to your fabric when you're doing the placement line and the tack down, because sometimes that tack down stitch will show up underneath that little decorative stitch cover stitch. But since this is a good satin stitch, you could use more of a neutral color if you wanted to, and then the satin stitch covers it all up good. Okay, so the applique part is done, and so next technique is going to be the chenille, and that's on page 11 starting with step 20. And I'm doing mine in the yellow fabric, and so I've threaded up with the yellow. And usually when you're doing the chenille, you're making your own chenille, and so it has you cut 4 pieces of fabric. One piece is just going to be your base, and we're going to do this just like it was applique. Well, it is applique. And then we use the other 3 pieces for the chenille part. So what it's going to do first is a placement line. Then we're going to lay that piece of fabric over the placement line and stitch the tack down. Now I'm just going to trim that away. And I trimmed it away. And what it's going to do now is the cover stitch. And it is doing a little decorative stitch as the cover stitch. So this is what I was talking about. I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. It's just not as heavy a stitch as the satin stitch. And you still may get kind of a little raveling on your fabric edge. But that doesn't really matter with the chenille because we're going to get little ravels when we do the chenille part of it. Anyway, kind of zoom in and you can see the little decorative stitch. After it does that little cover stitch, you're going to take your 3 pieces of fabric, make sure you're laying them right side up. So the first one's right side up, second one, and then third one, so they're all right side up. And you're just laying them on top of each other, and then you're going to lay those over the heart, and then it's going to stitch like a basting stitch to hold these down. So it's a longer tack down stitch. Then you're going to come in and we're going to trim all 3 layers of the chenille next to that basting stitch. Now what it's going to do after you trim all 3 layers, it's going to come back and now it's stitching the little channels that we're going to use for the chenille. Stitches all of the channels, what we're supposed to do now is go in and remove this basting stitch. So it says you can use a seam ripper or whatever. I'm just going to use my scissors here and throw the thread on the floor and remove that basting stitch all the way around. After you remove the basting stitch, this is when what we're going to do is go in and we're going to cut in right down the center of each of these channels. I don't have to cut these 2 on the ends because they're going to ravel out because they don't have a stay stitch down. And this is where the little chenille cutter works, or I'm just going to use the seam ripper. You just want to make sure, I'm going from this side, you want to make sure you're just getting a hold of the top 3 layers. You don't want to like cut into your background fabric and everything. So just kind of pry up, make sure you're underneath all 3 layers. Can you kind of see that? And then you just take your seam ripper, or that chenille cutter works better. I'm going to take my scissors. The chenille cutter works better. I guess it's a little sharper. And just go in and cut right down the center of each of those. Okay, like there, it didn't feel like I got a hold of all 3 layers. Nope, I didn't. See? So you want to make sure you're getting all 3 layers, because you want your chenille to be nice and fluffy. There we go. And now, I'm going to go over there. Now, to make it chenille and fluff up, I usually do this part after I'm done with the project and I've unhooped it and everything, but I'm going to go ahead and do it since we're doing it now and it says to do it in the instructions. It recommends that you take a water and just kind of squirt the fabric a little bit, get it a little bit wet, and that helps it chenille. And then just take a brush, take a fingernail file, something that, and you just start rubbing the heck out of it. And that's just gonna make it start raveling out, and then when it dries, it looks like chenille. And I'm trying to think some of the projects that we've done with the chenille. We've done hearts and what can you think of? The little ice cream cones I think we did with chenille. trying to think of some other stuff. It'll come to me here in a little minute. But just keep roughing it up. And then when it dries, it looks a lot better. But that just fluffs it up and makes it look fluffy. We've done flowers this way, all kinds of little flowers.
The fruit stand.
Oh yeah, the fruit. Yeah, we did the chenille fruit, the hot pads, and like the Santa Claus, his beard and stuff like that. Okay. Look at all the fuzz I got out of there. So now I'm just going to clean it up and let it dry a little bit. Okay, so our chenille project is done, and the next one that we're working on is going to be our fringe project. And what it's going to stitch off first is just going to be the leaves of our flowers, and those aren't fringed, and so I still have just the regular pre-wound bobbin in the bobbin, and then I've threaded up with the green, and it will stitch these off first. Okay, now the two little outer parts of the flowers, that's what's going to be the chenille part. And so at this step, this is when it's telling us to change to the bobbin with the water-soluble thread. And they have a note here, we recommend using water-soluble bobbin thread to avoid accidentally cutting the stems fill stitches from the back of the hoop. So used to, when they first started coming out with the technique of the fringe, so I'm saying chenille, fringe, after you stitch the fringe part, you were supposed to cut the bobbin thread, but the water-soluble bobbin thread has made it a little bit easier to do that. Now, sometimes they have you switch back and forth, so they might do like the fringe part where you need the water soluble in the bobbin, and then it stitches the center, and at that point you need to switch back to your regular bobbin. So just always read the instructions, make sure that whenever it tells you to change to the water soluble thread or change back to your regular thread, you're doing it at the appropriate time. So we're on page 12, step 33. She has the little symbol here for the water-soluble bobbin, and she has it highlighted here. So we're going to put that in our bobbin. So we've wound the water-soluble, and we just keep the bobbin with that spool of thread because you don't want to get that bobbin mixed up with your regular pre-wound bobbin because that would not be good. And it is going to go ahead and stitch both of the fringe flowers at the same time. So we can leave that water soluble in there for both of the outer parts of the flowers. I've threaded up with my pink color that I want my first flower to be, and it will stitch that off. So I've threaded up with my next flower color. I still have the pre-wound, or not the pre-wound, the water-soluble bobbin in the bobbin case. And I just wanted to just see how, when it does the fringe, see how the machine's doing a real wide zigzag stitch or satin stitch, because that's going to be the part that fringes out. So finished stitching our fringe flowers, and so at this point I need to switch out the bobbins. So I'm going to take the water-soluble bobbin out of the machine, and I'm going to put it back in its little bag with the spool of thread so that I don't get this mixed up with my other bobbins. And I'm going to put the pre-wound back in. And then I've gone ahead and I've threaded the top of the machine with the next color. But I want you to look at your screen because it's going to be stitching the inside part of the larger flower, but it's also going to be stitching part of the little decorative stitch rainbow here. So decide which color you want both of those to be. So I'm going to do it with the little kind of turquoisey teal color. So I have the regular bobbin in there, the pre-wound, and it will stitch both of those parts. Okay, now I'm doing the center of the other flower, so it's going to do the center, and then it's going to come over here and do the bottom part of the rainbow. And this, when it's doing this center part, these are what they call the holding stitches, and this is what's gonna hold our fringe flower in place when we fringe it. And we will fringe the little flowers after we finish the project and we take it out of the hoop. And now we're just gonna finish stitching the little decorative stitch rainbow. And so I've threaded up with the pink color, and it's gonna do one of the little rainbow parts. Now I know that this is not the right order of the rainbow as far as the colors, but it's okay. Now, the little rainbow is done stitching, but the last thing that's going to stitch off is going to be like the name. It's going to say Machine Embroidery has my, and then it has the little heart right there, and then it's going to do the body of the butterfly and the rest of our little labels for everything. So I'm doing that in the darker gray color thread. So I went ahead, I've threaded up with that up top, and I've put that black pre-wound in my bobbin, because again, I want that darker bobbin thread when it's doing these tiny little stitches. So it's going to take about 7 minutes to stitch all of this off, and so we will come back when it's done. Okay, so I finished stitching, and I went ahead and I took it out of the hoop. I trimmed all my little jump threads and everything, and then I went ahead and took it to the iron and pressed it and got rid of my little crosshair that I had drawn on the back side of the fabric. And now we're ready to fringe. And so I've fringed this flower already. And so what you do is you just turn it over and you take your squirt bottle and you spray real good and get it wet, and then just kind of rub it and let that water sink in good, and then turn it to the right side, and then just take your fingernail, tweezers, something, and just start kind of scraping on it and getting the stitches to pull out. I may need to spray it some more. I'm going to spray it from this side. You have to get it pretty wet to dissolve that water-soluble thread. And then, there we go. Now it's starting. So just keep working at it and getting it to fringe out. Well, the pink one wasn't that hard to do. It just came right out. Okay, I'm going to keep working on this and get it to fringe out. And then we will come back and we will hoop it. So I got them both fringed, and then in the instructions it says to hoop it in our little 8-inch hoop and then remove the basting stitches and the little registration marks. I went ahead because I figured it would be easier to remove the registration marks before I got it hooped, but I still have the basting stitch, so it just kind of gives me a guideline to how I need to hoop it. And so I'm just going to lay the inner ring down, put the fabric on top of it, and then you just want the, kind of use that line as a guide. Okay, I got it hooped. I went ahead and I removed the basting stitches and all, and then after trying to hoop this, I'm not so sure it wouldn't be easier. Instead of cutting your background fabric a 9x9, you might go ahead and cut it like a 10x10 and give yourself just a little bit more fabric to get it hooped. But now I'm just gonna make sure that screw is good and tight, and then I'm gonna come in and just trim the fabric right up next to the hoop all the way around. See, it just didn't have very much fabric there at all. Okay, oh, now my phone's ringing. And it's done.